Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Vonage Gems, your favorite bi-weekly Ruby show brought to you by us at the Vonage Developer Relations team. My name is Ben Greenberg, and I am the Ruby Developer Advocate here at Vonage. And welcome to episode 4 of Vonage Gems. Really exciting to be here. It is going to be awesome. Hello, Sudipto. Nice to see you again. Yes, Rails new indeed. That's what we do every week. We just instantiate new Rails apps. That's our fun. Hey, Luke, nice to see you too. Welcome. Today's episode is going to be a fun one. I promise you that. Well, at least I think it'll be fun for me, because we are going to talk about the latest release of Ruby coming out pretty soon. And it's got a big new number at the very top of it. It's Ruby 3. So we're not at 2.8. It's not 2.7.1. This is a major release, Ruby 3. And every time you see a major release, you get a little excited because major release usually means big things. And in this case, it is actually a lot. There are a lot of big things in this upcoming release of Ruby. So today, what we're going to do is actually just play around with it a little bit together. We are going to explore some of those things. Yes, there is new release things, new stuff, and Sudipto says also made breaking changes. We'll talk about that as well. Our agenda for today is just to have some fun, to explore, to see if we can break some of this stuff, to figure out how it works. Today is on the calendar, the 23rd of December, which means for a lot of the world, this is holiday time or vacation time or just time taking away from the daily grind. So in that spirit, we're not going to build an app. We're not going to have a strict agenda. We're going to have a bit of a holiday spirit time. As you know or may know, Ruby releases a new version every Christmas for many years now. So Christmas on the Gregorian calendar is in 2 days, on Friday, the 25th of December. And so in 2 more days, what you see on your screen right now, Ruby 3.0.0 or 3.0.0, release candidate 1 will eventually become a major release. The final release of Ruby 3.0. We are almost there. So we're going to walk through it together, if that sounds good. I think it sounds good. And if you're interested, I spent a little time surmising some of this stuff up for a recent blog post on the Vonage Learn blog. So if you go to learn.vonage.com and you search for Ruby, this will be the latest post on there. And it's called All I Want for Christmas is Ruby 3. I'll share a link here for folks. So that's the link to the blog post. And in that blog post, I basically walk through some of what I think are some of the highlights that I'm looking forward to when it comes to this new release of Ruby 3. So for me, some of those big things that I'm closely watching are Ruby signatures, RBS as they're called, Ractors, Ruby actors, not Ractors like Jurassic Park dinosaurs, but Ruby actors. And lastly, we've done this since Ruby 2.7, where we introduced pattern matching into Ruby as a concept. And in Ruby 3, we expand upon that with even more options for pattern matching. So that gets even more built up in Ruby 3. There's a lot more stuff happening in Ruby 3.0 release, and we're going to talk about some of those other things too. But in particular, I want to focus in on the Ruby signatures, Ruby actors, the R actors, and more pattern matching. That's really exciting for me. Well, to get to play with the Ruby 3 release candidate 1, we have to install it. So a little bit of forewarning, I already had installed it on my system because I wanted to at least get taken care of that one part. So if you can see my terminal, let's do this. That should be good. So if you can see my terminal, I'm using rbenv to manage my Ruby versions locally. So you see on my system, I have a bunch of different Rubies installed, all the way back to Ruby 2.2. I could probably delete some of these, but they're there. The reason why I have so many Rubies installed is when we were working on some of our Ruby apps for Vonage, I'd like to make sure that they run across the Rubies that are still out there and used by our community. I want to make sure that things don't break for those folks. So right now I'm building most of our stuff using Ruby's 2.7.2, which is the latest stable release. But I just installed today Ruby 0.0 release candidate 1. That's right there. That's pretty cool. And if I check to see what version I'm using locally, I'm using that version. And if here, let me just do this for a minute up at the help. You see that I can set a version of Ruby to either use across my entire system globally or just for this shell, specific shell I'm in right now. So what I did was I used shell to say I only want to use Ruby 3.0 in this shell instance. So I'm in Ruby 3.0 right now, which means that if I open up IRB, and for folks who don't know what IRB is interactive Ruby. It's sort of like your local playground where you get to play with Ruby on your system and test things out. This is the Ruby 3 IRB. And it looks in many ways really different than IRBs that we've seen before. Just to give you a small example, let's say I'm creating a method. Def say hello name, okay? Even look at that. You see how the IRB in Ruby 3 has color coding for the method. That's pretty cool. And it also automatically indents here, which is also pretty cool. That's I haven't seen that for a while. So like puts I can type. Pretty cool, right? So if we did like hello, Ben, right? But see, that's Ruby 3 IRB, which is cool. But that means in IRB for Ruby 3, we should have access to a lot of the experimental and new things. So for example, that R actor we mentioned is instantiated there. We have the class of the R actor, which is really, really cool. And we're going to play with that actually just in a few moments. So that's IRB. What we want to talk about with first, let's start with the Ractors or R actors. What exactly are Ruby actors? This concept, I think, is it's perhaps a bit harder to understand, but it has some of the most groundbreaking potential for Ruby as a language, which is what they do for the first time. They introduce thread-safe concurrency into the language. So now you can run things concurrently with Ruby. Well, it's experimental still. Even in Ruby 3 major release, when it comes in 2 days, it'll still be experimental. But you can begin to run things concurrently. You can have concurrency within the Ruby language, which I think has implications for a lot of things, which is really, really cool. So here's an example here that they introduced for us. We're calculating prime. And let's just take a look at that example together. So if we look at that example, we see that we acquire the prime gem, right? And we instantiated 2 local variables at the same time in this example. They call them R1 and R2, right? And they equal a range of 1 to 2, okay? And then we map over that range. And inside the map block, we're instantiating a new Ractor, right? A new R actor. And we say, and you see that this R actor has its own methods that are inherent to it, right? As you would expect. One of them, let's just take a look at them quickly. One of them is RECV, one of them is SEND, and one is TAKE. So receive, send, and take. Now, in consonance with sort of the methodology of Ruby, these do as they sound, because Ruby's meant to be readable. It's meant to sound and be like a human language. So if you can imagine, Ractor, the R actor dot receive is what is taking in, right? Send is sending to that R actor instance, and take is getting back the results, right? So we, in this new block for our actor, we instantiate a local variable inside the block, and we call it n. And we say n equals to receive. I'm now instantiating a new R actor, and I'm calling prime on the number, meaning give me a true or false whether this number is a prime number or not, right? So now that we have 2 local variables, R1 and R2, both of them are contained in them instances of the R actor, right? The Ruby actor. So R1, R2 in Ruby previously, up until this point, would have to run as separate blocks of code, executed sequentially, one after the other. They would be blocking in their running. Now, R1 and R2 can happen at the same time. That's really cool. That's huge. This is almost like it's modern. It's making Ruby jump ahead by leaps and bounds. So let's actually do this together. Let's open up IRB again, and let's play around and see what it looks like. So require prime, great. R1 and R2 are our local variables, and we're going to say that's going to take a range between 1 and 2, and we're going to map over that range. And we're going to instantiate a local variable, as we said, which is going to be a new Ractor. Oops, sorry, not the Ractor.new do. N is going to be a Ractor, right? And we're going to say N is their prime. That's the method. And you see the output here is internal Ractor warning. Ractor is experimental. Behavior may change in future versions of Ruby. Also, there are many implementation issues. Thank you very much for the warning. Ractor 2 and Ractor 3, we have these Ractors, okay? So R1 send, so we're going to 61 minus 1. Look at that. Ractor 2, it's running, right? It's running in the background. R2 send to 61 plus 15. That's running in the background. So you have one running in the background, another running in the background at the same time. Friends, that's like mind-blowing. And then we're going to take the results. R1.take is true. R2.take is also true. That's really cool. So if you can think about the implementations for yourself, what might that look like for you? What kind of possibilities does this open in your own implementations to be able to run concurrent code? It's really, really cool. So you could, even like in the Vonage context, for example, and just thinking extemporaneously within the Vonage context, you could have like, I haven't instantiated a whole Vonage SDK in here or anything. I'm just going to have some sort of like meta code for a second. But let's say we had a Vonage client and we wanted to send an SMS. So we could be like SMS1 equals Vonage.sms.send with the parameters, whatever they might be. And then at the same time, SMS2 would be another one of those. And that could run together concurrently without blocking and waiting for one to finish before the next one. That's really, really cool. That was where my mind first jumped to. We just actually dealt with an issue raised on Ruby SDK repo because somebody ran into this issue where they were sending a lot of SMS messages at the same time, and they were running into some threading issues. And they realized it's because they were trying to run over each other while it was happening in sequential order. Whereas with our actors, with Ruby actors, that would no longer be an issue. And that would be an implementation. That'd be the way they would implement the Vonage SDK. The SDK itself would not need to do anything different. It would be how they implemented it using our actors. That's kind of mind-blowing. That's really, really cool. A huge new feature. You can't really take that for granted. So in addition to our actors, and you can, by the way, the docs are here for them. So let's just take a look at that for a second. Ruby's actor-like concurrent abstraction. Multiple R actors in interpreter process. They don't share anything, unlike threads. Don't share everything, unlike threads, sorry. Most objects are unshareable objects, so you don't need to care about the thread safety problems, which is caused by sharing. Some objects are shareable objects, immutable objects, which don't refer to unshareable objects. For example, I equals 1, 2, 3. I is immutable, right? S equals string.freeze. S is immutable, especially when you call .freeze on it. A equals an array of 1, and then a single array of 2, and then 3. A is not an immutable object because A refers to unshareable object 2, which is not frozen. So interesting. A lot of details in here. It's thread safety. You can see a lot of examples of how to run it and the code. There's a yield block as well, which is really cool. communication between our actors. So you have, we played around just right now with send and receive, right? Which is the push. There's also yield and take. We did take, which is pull, but there's also yield. And then you have select, which can wait for the success of a take, yield, or receive. Excuse me. So you have all these different ways to interact with our actors. It's pretty cool. In addition to our actors, we have other fun stuff. So I mentioned another one of them in my blog post, which is Ruby signatures. Ruby signatures are RBS files. RBS is really, really interesting because this runs in consonance with a developing trend amongst a lot of languages, Ruby included, which is to start thinking about typing our code, right? And you may have heard me talk about typing in previous episodes. I'm a bit of an advocate for it now at this point. You can say I'm converted to the cause. Prior to this, the primary way to type your code in Ruby was with something called sorbet, right? Sorbet is still important. It is still fundamentally important, and I want to underline that. RBS does not do exactly what sorbet does. They're different. They still don't exactly have a one-for-one overlap. Sorbet does more, right? And if you actually want to hear about this a bit, I recommend Dev News podcast. There's an episode recently. Let me see if I can find the episode. Let's see here. Is it in here? Where is it? It says I can find it, but I don't see it. There's an episode of Dev News podcast from the Dev blog, which interviews Penelope Phippen, who's a major Ruby contributor. They were one of the lead maintainers of RSpec for many years and is on Ruby Central. And they talk about in that podcast Ruby 3 and specifically how this interacts with sorbet. Penelope happens to work for sorbet, but not for Stripe, which maintains sorbet. They're not on the sorbet team, but they're within the same company. And if you find that episode of Dev News, I highly recommend it. They do a fantastic job sort of explicating the differences between RBS and sorbet. So what RBS does, RBS is a way that's inherent within Ruby, the language itself, to describe the types of your code. What sorbet does, which RBS does not yet do, is sorbet is a really fully dynamic checker, right? Runtime checker of your code. Whereas RBS will help you define the types. They both have their own ways to define the types, and this is where it gets a little bit complex. Ruby has gone with RBS as the type methodology, whereas sorbet uses RBI. They're not the same. So at some point, RBS and RBI will have to find a meeting of the minds. But that's not for here for now. But RBS is inherently intrinsic to the language itself, a way to define the types within your code. So looking at the example they provide in this news update, you see here they created a module called Chat App, right? And they define every step of the way. So we got a version constant. What is it defined as? It's a string, right? The class of a channel. It's got an adder reader, 3 adder readers, right? One is a name, it's a string. One is a messages, it's an array with a message. Then you got users, which has an array of user and bot, right? And this pipe here is a union type. So user or bot, right? So users can be an array of either users or bots, whereas messages can be an array of only message, right? And then it has an initialize method, which seems very familiar to anyone who's worked with Ruby. And initialize method takes in a string and doesn't return anything. This little symbol here is to define what the method returns. And in this case, in the initialize method, as most initialize methods, we don't actually care about what it returns. So we provide void. And then the next following method in the example is post. And you see that it takes in a string called from, which can be either a user or a bot. Here's that pipe again, which is the union type, user or bot. And it returns a message, right? Which is really cool. And you can check out the README for that as well. So here's the README for RBS. I'll share that link as well. So this is the README for RBS. Really helpful, I think, actually. And it has a longer version of that example in its README. Talks about how to install the gem for RBS, but it does come included in Ruby 3.0 by default, so you don't need to install it separately. It has its own CLI. And then it got really cool stuff. So for example, this is how to retrieve the definition of the string gsub method, right? So if you go down to the very bottom, print instance methods gsub method types join, and you see that string, it's hash, string match, string, enumerator, string pattern, regex. It's pretty cool. So let's play with it for a second, shall we? Sound good? So let's do that. Let's exit out of IRB. Let's touch sample.rb. Why not? Let's make this a little fit in there a little more. That looks good. Okay. So we have sample.rb here. Empty Ruby file. Nothing is in it right now. Just the way we like it. Nothing wrong. There's nothing in it. There can be nothing wrong. It says, in order to use it, we shouldn't need to do much, right? So let's try. Let's create a very simple method and see what happens. Let's say class greeting, kind of along the same theme we had before. And class greeting, let's say it has a class method. Def, what should we call it? Say hello. Say hello will take one parameter of a name, right? So how do we type parameters again? Let's take a peek. Just like that. Looks good, right? So let's do that. Here it is exactly. I didn't even have to even invent it. Oops. It looks like we should put a colon as well. And this will return to us a string. That looks good, right? So we have that. Oops, let's get rid of that. We have our file. Let's make sure our version is what we think it is. It is. Interesting, right? So we have a sample, a syntax error here, unexpected colon. And then also, formal argument cannot be a constant. Syntax error, unexpected end, expecting end of input. So it looks like it's not accepting this format, even though it's following the format in the RBS guide. So that is fascinating. Do we need to acquire anything? I wonder. Nope. Do we need to install the gem? Still did not like it. Oops. Well, that's fascinating, right, friends? A very simple example doesn't seem to be working the way that they said it should be working. Now, it could be me. It might be me. It probably is me. Let's speak a little more. Let's see if we can access RBS from the command line. There is RBS. That's pretty cool. So it's there. We run RBS version. We see we're in 1.0 pre-release. That does look like it, right? Doesn't seem to be happy with it, which is really interesting because it's a very simple example that we're trying to build with. Let's even take their example. Let's take this. Let's comment this out. Interesting, right? So we should be able, let's actually just run the terminal in here. Get a little faster. Okay, and then if we say Ruby sample.rb. Interesting. I wonder if I need to do bundle exec. Nope. Well, because there's no bundler file, obviously. Huh. Ruby 3. Isn't that interesting, friends? So if we would run like, let's do this. It doesn't accept it. Well, that syntax is not making Ruby happy on the interpreter level, which is really interesting to me. I wonder if it's not fully implemented yet. And that's why it's a release candidate. And the first release candidate, maybe in 2 days' time, it'll be implemented. But it does not seem to be working based on our very simple example. In fact, the example is, at this point, a copy and paste from the docs itself. So if your copy and pasting the docs itself is not working, chances are something is not exactly right there. So what else do we have to play with? We're going to move on from RBS because that is what it is. I think it's exciting in potential, and hopefully it'll be working by the time the major release is out in about 2 days. But clearly something is not happening there. I don't know what it is, but it's not. Okay. So in addition to that, they have their own type checker, by the way. So this has potential to overlap with Sorbet's type checker called TypeProf. It's not yet as fully developed as Sorbet, but it might at some point. But that's coming built into the Ruby 3 release as well. We talked about our Ractors. Hey, Roland, how's it going? Nice to see you. We are just playing with Ruby 3 is what we're doing. And we discovered that a copy and paste, Roland, from the docs for Ruby 3 in the release candidate 1 does not do what it says it's supposed to do. So that's exciting. And potentially will work in 2 days' time when they make the final major release on the 25th of this month. So we're moving down the road, and we're talking about other things that are in here. So we have one-line pattern matching is redesigned. We now have right word assignment in Ruby, which is really interesting. And so some of these things, let's just take a minute to step back for a second. Some changes to a language, this is now Ben's opinion speaking. Some changes to a language inherently are helpful because they either increase the efficiency, the speed of a language, they increase your utility in being able to use it. They might increase the friendliness of it. And by friendliness, I mean the intuitiveness, in other words. Some other changes to a language I find to be unnecessarily convoluted. And what I mean by that is sometimes you just add more and more ways to accomplish something. To what end? Does it make it faster? Does it make it more efficient? Does it increase the utility? What's the purpose of this change? Because now, for some changes, now as, let's say, a developer who's code reviewing somebody else's code, I need to know not two ways of doing something, or even, let's say, one way, or not only just two ways, maybe 3, 4, 5 ways of accomplishing the same thing. Why? Why can't there be a common way to do something? So, for example, I'm not exactly sure what the benefit is of rightward assignment in the Ruby language. There's other examples of this coming in Ruby 3 as well, and we'll talk about those in a moment too. But this one we just happened to come across as we're going through the docs. I'm not exactly sure why that's there. It's cute, I get it, but I don't see really the purpose of it. But nonetheless, let's play with it for a minute. So we know, so this is the syntactical sugar to do rightward assignment. So let's just look at that for a minute in IRB. So if we open the Ruby 3 IRB again, so we know that like A equals 1, right? So now what is A? A is 1, right? 1, 2 is to B. B is now 2, right? So this is leftward assignment. You start with a variable and you give it its value. This is rightward assignment. You start with a value and give it its variable. I don't know why that's important. Like, I genuinely don't understand why we need to have that, but it's there. It's now in Ruby 3. Do with it as you wish. Rightward assigned to your heart's content, but it is there. Interesting. So now the in keyword is changed to return a Boolean. So in version 2.7, the latest major release, if you use in1, you would get a no matching pattern error, right? You would get an exception, whereas now you get a false. I actually like this. This to me is cleaner. I see it why that would make sense. That's a good use. This is really cool, and I talk about this in my blog post as well. So we mentioned in the blog post that, let's go down there. In Ruby 2.7, we begun introducing pattern matching into Ruby. One of the other languages out there that I have a bit of a on and off again love with is Elixir. If you ever heard of it. Elixir is this beautiful language. It's built on top of Erlang, but uses the syntax of Ruby. So it's got the best of like that incredible concurrency, incredible power and speed, but none of sort of the obtuseness of sort of the Erlang sort of syntax. It's got Ruby's human language and readability on top of it. It's beautiful. And one of the things that Elixir really does profoundly is pattern matching. And Ruby now in 2.7 allows us to start playing with pattern matching as well. And in Ruby 3 coming out soon, we expand upon that even more with another paradigm, another sort of format for pattern matching called what do we call it? The find pattern. In fact, I referenced in this blog post another blog post by this person here. I'm not going to try and pronounce this name. I cannot, and so I will not even attempt to do it. But this blog post is fantastic, and they go through Ruby pattern matching in tremendous detail. It's enormous, this blog post, but it's so detailed. I love it. So I'm actually going to share this blog post here as well as a great resource. It's womanonrails.com/Ruby pattern matching. Fantastic blog post. And what they do succinctly is that this person describes pattern matching really great in a great way. They say that pattern matching is a way to specify a pattern for our data. And if data are matched to the pattern, we can deconstruct them according to this pattern. So a skeleton of that would look something like this. Case, you have a case, right? In this expression. In the pattern, if it's this pattern, do something. If it's this pattern, do something else. If it's or this, right, as the default. That's great. But the problem with this is multi-layered elements of elements. It broke down at that point, and you need to run a case within a case to get to, like, let's say, an array with an array inside of it. So now the find pattern allows us to search within elements that have multiple elements to allow us to search within them. So I provide an example in my blog post, and we can run through that example together. So let's take this example here. Got it. We're going to say, this is our example. We have a variable called today that holds an object, a hash, sorry, with weather is sunny. If the weather is sunny, then drinks are the following: an array of drinks of name espresso, daily frequency 3, name cold brew, daily frequency 2, and then another day of Tuesday. Great. So that's today. It's sunny, and these are my drinks: 3 espressos and 2 cold brews. Don't question the caffeine consumption. It's how I get through the days. And today will be Tuesday. Today is Wednesday, but that's a minor point. So we have this beautiful variable. We can look at it for a second. We see it's there. Lovely. We want a pattern match in the variable. So this is exactly the skeleton from here, right? Case today, right? Let's copy this. If I can copy. There we go. We're going to copy it into here just so we can see it a little cleaner. So let's get rid of that. Okay. So we have this thing here. Case today, right? Today being the variable. In weather sunny, so where the weather is sunny, I want to match all drinks, right? I don't care about these drinks where the name is cold brew and the daily frequency is whatever frequency I pass in, and everything else, right? Puts frequency times a day. So if I were to run that, let's go in here. Oops, I think I'm missing one more end. Yeah. Great. Am I missing a syntax? Unexpected end. Got a syntax error here. Huh. I don't need it to spell check for me. Thank you. What is my syntax error, friends? Let's take a look at the release notes. I have one extra. I might have one extra. That might be the issue. There we go. It was one extra asterisk. So we get the answer 2 times a day, right? Because with my variable of today, right? There's today, where weather is sunny, right? I want the drinks where the name is cold brew, and I want the frequency of those drinks, right? So, and that's how many frequency? 2 times a day. So that's, and you see here that this is an array of, here it is, sorry. This is, drinks is an array of multiple objects. So previously with pattern matching in 2.7, I cannot search through an array of multiple items. I would need to have a sub search, a sub pattern match inside it that's another layer down. Whereas the find pattern, it says find patterns experimental, right? But with the find pattern, I can search through multiple elements. That's really cool. That to me is super useful. In this theme of things which I don't fully understand why they're put into the language, the biggest one for me is endless method definition. This one mine is mind-blowing. I don't fully understand why we have this here. So it is as it sounds, def square x times x. Why would I want this? Normally what's missing here, friends, if this was not Python, this is Ruby, what is missing? The end keyword to say the method is over. Now you can have a method without signifying end. This Ruby is not Python. We don't need it. I don't understand. I love Python too. I think Python's a beautiful language, but let Python have its endless methods. We don't need endless methods in Ruby. That's where I fall on this conversation. Our opinion was overruled clearly by the Ruby language folks, but it's there. Yeah, Luke, going back to the to the question on pattern matching through multiple elements, you're totally right. Luke says that this feels like this is always a late feature language maturity. Feels significant every time I see it. 100,000%. It does seem like it's always a late feature to languages. And when it comes, you're like, wow, that was so important. And I'm so glad it's here. And it certainly is significant every time it comes. Going back to my gripe at the endless method. So let's take this for example. Let's copy and paste that. So let's add that in there. We now have a method called square. What? Where's the end? So if I would do like square 5, we get the square of 5, which is 25. That's not cool, friends. I'm not a fan of this. I'm not looking forward to reviewing code one day of somebody else that has endless methods in Ruby. I don't know if I'm going to be the person who says, you know, really in our convention, we should be adding end statements here, but I might be that person. I'm not a fan of it. Maybe call me old fashioned, but it's there in Ruby 3. This is cool. Except is now built into as a hash method, whereas before it was experimental and you needed to like include it explicitly. So let's say you have a hash of A key with value 1, B key with value 2, C key value 3, and then you say I want everything except for A. You'll get B and C. That's pretty cool. That's like a nice little feature. I totally see why that's there. It's intuitive to me. It makes sense. Ruby, by the way, is now tremendously fast in version 3.0. It is as fast as some of those popular languages out there. And by some measures, Ruby is the 6th most popular language on the internet today. By some measures, by others, it is less popular than Bash. Say what you will. But at this point, Ruby now is very fast. In fact, IRB is 53 times faster in Ruby 3 than it was in Ruby 2.7, which is pretty cool. And in addition to that, different standard libraries that come packaged with the language are all updated. Ruby Gems is now in version 3.2, Bundlers on 2.2.2, JSON's on 2.4, which is cool. And then we have a bunch of more default things added to the Ruby language. Bunch of them here, you see them. Those are some of the big changes in Ruby 3. They're huge. Well, I'm a little disappointed that RBS is not working yet in Ruby 3.0 release candidate 1, at least as far as I can figure out. I'm excited about the potential of it. I wish we could have played with it together, but it did not happen as far as static analysis goes. I don't think I did anything wrong because I just copied and pasted exactly what the example was here and it didn't work. But maybe at some point it'll work. Type prof looks really cool. I think as far as what we're looking at going down the road, at least for the near-term future, will be some combination of RBS with Sorbet, incorporating RBS as a type file declaration mode, being able to use Sorbet as the type checker, with RBS as the type files. I think would be a good combination for at least the near future. You can try it online. Let's check that out. And that's cool. Well, see, it works here, which is so interesting. So what am I doing different? That is interesting. Let's actually copy this whole thing and see if I can get it to work. Because now I'm just really confused. Okay, we're deleting everything. Just have that, right? And then if we run Ruby sample, it seems to do something. So maybe it does work. Oh, wait, there's nothing. No, what am I saying? TypeProf analyzes code that's not yet type checked, right, with RBS and gives you what it thinks are the types of that non-typed code. So this is actually two separate things. That doesn't mean it works. Hey, Greg, nice to see you. Welcome as we are wrapping up our Ruby 3 exploration. It's really cool. I think I'm excited to see what this finally, all of it hashes down together in 2 days' time when it is released as a final version release as Ruby 3.0.0, which is really cool. For me, some of the biggest changes are more pattern matching, eventually when RBS works that we want it to work, and the Ractor, really concurrent execution of code, thread-safe concurrency in Ruby, I think is going to make Ruby possible to be used for some of those really high-performance web apps that we sometimes think can't exist in the domain of Ruby because of performance around concurrency, which I think will now be addressed. So that's awesome. Really, really cool. And lastly, IRB is just so much better than it was in previous versions. It is fast. It is pretty with color coding syntax, automatic indentation. The things I'm a little like not so excited about would be like right word assignment. I don't see why this needs to, I don't, what was it again? I had it a moment ago. Yeah. I don't see why that needs to exist. I don't see why we need to say, you know, I don't know why we need right word assignment. I think that's easy enough, but it's there. And the thing which really kind of annoys me a bit is the endless methods. I don't think we need a method without an end statement. I think it's fine to have end statements. Ruby is Ruby. Python is Python. They're different languages. One can have ends. One cannot. Doesn't have to have ends. They're beautiful the way they are. That kind of covers a lot of it. I'm excited to see what you build with Ruby 3. Really exciting time for Ruby. You know, we just, in the world of Rails, we just had Rails 6.1 release, which we're upgrading all of our apps on Vonage 2 as we speak. And with Ruby 3 coming out, really cool. We didn't even talk about the latest and greatest release in the world of Basecamp, which is Hotwire, HTML over the wire, which is all over the Twitter universe recently. That's for a whole another episode. But I hope you enjoyed this. I definitely did. And please join us in any conversation we might have on the Vonage community Slack or on Twitter as you play around with Ruby 3 and what is coming for you. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you have, everyone, a great rest of the day. Bye.